All right, so this is the review for the first exam of our advertising management class. So let me jump to the framework. So remember the framework of this class is focused on the six M's. But let's take a minute to review, the whole marketing framework and how we arrive to that. So this is a marketing framework that is very similar that what you learn in 201, 301. So you have an analytical part of your, when it comes to marketing and formulating a strategy, you have first the analysis or analytical part where you understand the voice of the customer or consumer, context, which is the macro and micro environment, the company, which are the strengths and the weaknesses, then the competitive environment, including the five competitive forces, the collaborators or potential collaborators. So this is not necessarily the case. So this is your analysis, and this is constantly changing, right? So we have trends that change all the time. You have nature of competition. Maybe you have a new competitive advantage in terms of your strength. Maybe there is some consumer or customer habits or some social trend. So this is constantly changing. What should not change that much is your strategy, and your strategy really resides here, okay? And it's the so-called STP. So segmentation. So there may be new segments or new ways of segmenting, the market. Your target, again, this may be a change that you decide to make. Strategy really is about choices. Okay, so you may have one target or more than one target, or maybe your undifferentiated targeting strategy. Positioning, this is how you position yourself or differentiate versus your competition. And by the way, just like Michael Porter says, you really have two options. You can either go low cost, so that means you're going to be the low price, or you can go differentiation. Now, in differentiation, there is many ways to do that, and you can go after a small niche, or you can go after a much larger scope. So there's many different ways to position yourself. But at the end of the day, here is where you try to differentiate versus your competition. And then you design your four P's. Now, your four P's is your marketing mix. So, what is it that you're going to do in terms of product, which also includes branding, service? How are you going to promote your product? So, this is what this course is about. So, promoting has all the different ways to sell or communicate or persuade customers about your product or brand. Obviously, advertising is a big part of it and the different types of media. So we'll look at the six M's. So this is called sometimes the promotional mix because there is many different items within promotion. Then you have place, which is kind of your distribution strategy. Either you're gonna go brick and mortar or you're gonna go multi-channel or omni-channel. So this is place. And then where you're gonna set your price. By the way, within promotion, you have consumer promotions, trade promotion. A lot of trade promotions are like temporary price reductions and so on. And then you have also push and pull, which we'll talk about in a moment. So you're constantly evaluating and planning and changing. And then after the marketing mix, you have your specific plans or tactics. So what is specifically that you're going to do to your product or to your service or launching a new product? What mix, what media, or what advertising, or what are you going to do in terms of your promotions? Same thing in place, but here in place, it could also be tactics that you're going to do in your distribution. So, one of the things in marketing that is very important, probably the most important thing, is that, as Mr. Kotler, father of marketing, says, It really is about satisfying needs but delivering value, creating and delivering value. So this is really customer value or the perceived value. And most importantly, he emphasizes at a profit because again, you can be satisfying a, a need, but if you don't do it profitably, then maybe you have to change your pricing. So now, what this course is about is, or the framework that we're using in this course is the 6M. So the 6M is a model developed by the Harvard Business School for communications. And basically, what we have covered this semester is the first three. So within a strategic intent, so think of whenever you have a communications plan, how are you going to structure it based on the 6M model? So your strategic intent is really what are the objectives. Now the market is to whom the communication is going to be addressed. So this is basically a target, right? And this is basically your goals and objectives. Now again, for the purposes of remembering it, we have the 6M's. So this is what is your goal? What is it that you're trying to achieve? That's why it's intent. And for whom? Now, strategic execution is how are you going to do that? So, what is the story to be communicating? This is usually the ad or the creative, and where or how you're going to be delivering that message. So, that's your media. And then how much you're going to spend and how are you going to measure it. So, this is the impact. So, you have intent, execution, and impact. Okay. So, what we have focused on is these three. Okay. So, if you want to see a little bit of an outline of where we are, we started with a review of marketing, as I just did. I just noticed a typo here, and then our book starts with like a basically summary of of basically everything related to communications in terms of integrated marketing communication. So we'll talk about integrated marketing communication. And then what I did is I basically organized our chapters so that they follow the 6 F's, starting with the strategic intent part, which is mission and market, and then strategic execution, which we basically did message. And we did a series of case studies, right? So we did Nike in terms of segmentation, we looked at Zipcar, and we saw in terms of message and branding, we saw Apple's Think Different campaign. And then we spent a lot of time looking at Dove, right? Yeah, we did not have this is different guest lecturer. We had Dimitri Tuba, who basically talked about all of these different things as they're done by the ad agency and the role between the ad agency and the brand in terms of developing the creative from the strategy all the way to the advertising campaign and choosing the media. We have not, I have purposely not done digital marketing yet. So the TikTok case study and digital marketing, this will not be part of the exam. But if you want to think of like an outline for those of you who like to do like case studies, I mean study guides, that's your. And then if we look at our syllabus, again, mission, market, then after the exam, we'll do media, and then sorry, this is page one, this is page two, page three, and page four. So we started with mission, market, message, and now the midterm, and then we have media, and then money and measurement. I'm not going to spend too much time on 201, 301. We have marketing myopia with Theodore Levitt, considered the father of marketing. He's the first one to talk about needs as opposed to just products. So his famous quote from the marketing myopia HBR article is People don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. So we have, the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and we'll talk a little bit about this later. And we have also the so-called customer journey, which we're going to, at this point, look at the funnel in terms of objectives, but later we're going to see how all these different touch points are part of the journey that customers go through all the way to conversion or purchase and then beyond. So then we also look a little bit at the behavior, consumer behavior part of it. So, we have all these factors that in one way or another, affect our decision, right? So we have cultural factors, social factors, personal, so lifestyle, and so on, psychological. So these are the ones that are really tough, right? Because those beliefs and attitudes, perceptions are very much very internal and can differ significantly. So we already talked about the macro environment. You can think of the PESTEL framework, company, strengths and weaknesses, competition, so the five forces, competitive matrix, and then collaborators. And this is basically showing how retailing went from about, oh, sorry, not about, bow tie, bow tie relationship to a diamond ring. So what does that mean? It used to be very much seller, buyer, and now it's very collaborative. And this is called the customer team. And then STP, which is basically, again, group your customers based on similar needs, then choose one or more targets or segments, sorry, and that will be targeting. And then define your value proposition. So how are you going to position yourself to differentiate versus your competitors? So segmentation, we learn can do basically four different ways. So geographically, demographically, psychographically, which for me, a nice way to remember is AIO, activity, interest, opinions. But think of this as like all the things that go in your brain, right? So a person, and they're kind of unique attitudes, lifestyle. Now, behavioral has to do with how you behave. So benefits that you're looking for, or buyer stage, or user status, or life cycle. So these have to do with how you behave, or behavioral type of factors. So then in terms of targeting, you look at the different segments, and then based on their characteristics, who's already there, and your strengths and weaknesses, you decide which targets to choose. Now, target, you can take it to another level, which is what we call either clusters. Clusters will be different segments based on similarities, and a lot of times the similarity could be on a variety of factors. So some of those factors are on what we call a persona or consumer profile. And we're going to see how useful this is once we start using digital marketing, because in digital marketing, we can target based on all those things in a combination of those. So once again, positioning is about how you differentiate versus your competitors. Now, when we go to the 4Ps, we have decisions about our product in terms of how many product lines, depth, and then branding, and then our message, our media, our sales or trade promotions, which are usually pull or push. Well, trade promotions typically are push, but things like sampling and everything that goes directly to consumers is considered pull. Distribution, so again, you can go the regular route or maybe online only or maybe everything. So all of these marketing efforts are designed to increase the perceived value. And we want this perceived value to be higher than our price so that there is an incentive for consumers to purchase. And this consumer value or perceived value, I like to call it willing to pay, because willing to pay kind of gives you, a good way to remember what value is all about. and you want your price to be higher than your cost of goods because otherwise you won't make any money. But then it also depends on the target, right? So a McDonald's target or a McDonald's customer would value these things in a way where they're not willing to pay more for Starbucks. But then you have the Starbucks customer who's willing to pay more because a combination of these benefits justifies for this particular target having a higher price. So integrated communications, really is about consistency, clear, compelling message. And it could be about a company or a brand with all your different, let's say, promotional tools. Okay. And this is where, oh, I forgot, maybe I need to put it there. So we kind of started this with the Super Bowl ads. We looked at the Super Bowl ads and see which ones consistently deliver the same message across all the different channels. Now, one way to think about communications is through the hierarchy of effects. And we're going to talk a lot about this. But there is a hierarchy where typically you start by generating awareness. This is also called top of the funnel. We'll see this more closely in a moment. But what's important is if I bombard you with enough advertising, or let's say I have unlimited funds, which is again hypothetically, you will at some point become aware. Now, in terms of knowledge, if I deliver the message in a way that is easy to understand, then you should, be aware and know who I am and what I do. So this is called the thinking stage. Now, the tough part is here, because how do I make you like my product or service and prefer versus competition? Then have that conviction where you really want to buy my product. So this is the do stage. So the toughest part in marketing and advertising, but I would say marketing too, is the feel stage because this can be very, very subjective. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a little bit of chapter one, again, the introduction of your book, which is a summary of everything. There is a obviously big shift in advertising spending from media to digital because of cost. Now, in terms of this value equation that we talked about, benefits are not always functional. They can be experiential or psychological or emotional. Okay. Now, cost is usually money, but it could also be time. But typically, we think about money. So, just to reemphasize, what is integrated marketing communication? Is a coordinated, comprehensive plan or communications campaign or plan, depending. Plan would be before executing, and once it's executed, that provides a clear, consistent for maximum impact. So, this key thing is consistent, unified image. And you know, you really want to integrate several functions because if you have different, let's say, digital, you have social media, you have your website, and then you have TV, radio, billboard. If this is not integrated, then it's difficult to have a compelling message. And this is important because part of your brand identity, which eventually is kind of equity, is about how you consistently deliver this message. So we'll talk a little bit more about this with branding. So this so-called promotional mix, we think of the P in promote, includes many areas: advertising, direct marketing, digital, even sales promotion. So sales promotion is, again, is what some people call go to market. Go to market, but sales promotion a lot of times is everything that you do at the point of sale. So think of like in the supermarket, all the promotions that are going on at the grocery store. Then you have public relations and publicity. Publicity is a unpaid form of being promoted. and sales. So remember, sales and sales promotion is not the same thing. This is kind of your sales work. Now, most organizations have sales separate from marketing, but it really is about the same effort of promoting your product. Now, what happens in some instances, there are products and services that rely more on advertising and some that rely more on sales, which typically is more like B2B. So advertising is basically any paid form of communication. Here are some of the leading advertisers. Now, believe it or not, television, and I would say, I would including this streaming, it's still the most cost-effective way to reach a large number of consumers. So think of the Super Bowl or even football, right? So you have college football, you have professional football, and again, I'm thinking of streaming too. You have all sorts of popular things. Now, will this continue to be the best way? We don't know, right? Because social media is evolving very quickly. So you have YouTube. You could argue, well, is YouTube television or social media? I don't know. I think it's closer to television. It has ads, it has videos. I mean, and it has content. So So what is advertising? Well, the whole idea is to stimulate demand. So you have different types. You have at a national level. So this is basically the same campaign across the whole country, or you can do it by zone, or you can do it by retailer. So you have your, say, Crest may have different advertising with Walmart than they have with Kroger. And then you have primary and and selective. Um, this is more for general products, so think of like Kraft or General Motors, or then you have specific brands, right? Like Tide, Crest, and so on. You can do B2B, you can target professionals, you can target the trade, so think of this like trade shows and so on. Then there is also direct. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because these I'm going to cover in the second part of the semester. Digital, I'm not going to talk about the advantage of this. And then I'll talk about, again, this is sales promotions. We'll talk about that in the second part of the semester. So let's see what else. Publicity, again, is not directly paid, but it gives you a lot of credibility. So these are stories or articles most of the time. And for that, you usually need a PR effort or agency to help you with that. And personal sales is also, we'll talk about it separately. So all of these touch points or media or different types of medium, we'll talk about in the second part of the semester. Um, so these touch points, depending how they happen, typically if they are company initiated, right? If they're very planned, sometimes they don't have a lot of impact. And the ability to influence, even though you may have a lot of planning, is better when you have unexpected. Okay, so user generated content is kind of unexpected, and comments is kind of intrinsic. So here you can see the different types. So company created, very obvious. Intrinsics or interactions, unexpected, again, are beyond our control, and customer initiated. So this is kind of how it works. So we'll talk about this more also in the media here too. These are all the types of media. So we'll do the second part of the semester. So let's just jump to our first M, which is mission. So it's important to differentiate the different type of objectives, right? So you have very high level business objectives, right? So this is like achieve some sort of net profitability, um, 15% of sales. Marketing objectives have to do more with share of market. Okay. And then right below it, which is part of marketing, obviously, you have more specific, like social media or marketing objectives, which could be satisfaction, or in terms of specific campaigns or objectives, you can have things like awareness and so on. So we'll look at more closely some examples. But when most people in marketing are number one objective is awareness. Number two is preference, leads, loyalty. So think of the funnel. Now we have a couple of frameworks that we've used in this class on how to create these objectives. And the first framework is called the SMART framework. And SMART stands for, easy way to remember, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. So specific is what is it exactly that you want to accomplish? And we'll see a few examples in a second. How are you going to measure it or track it? Is it realistic? And then is it relevant? Is it relevant to your overall business goals? And then time-based. Very important to know by when are you going to meet these objectives? A year, 10 years, ever? So you need to make them time-based. Now, something that is important is to differentiate between goals and objectives. Generally speaking, and this is not always because nothing is set in stone, especially in marketing, goals are broader. Awareness, leads, retention, but then SMART objective is very, very specific. We will increase our number of hours, very specific, to 30,000 on social media in the next 6 months. Okay, so here we can see how, for example, this we will increase number of email subscriptions, so very specific, by 10%. So sorry, email subscriptions is really the metric. Followers is the metric. 10% and 30,000 is a specific in the next month, so time-based. Now here we don't know. We have to evaluate if it's really achievable and relevant. We don't have enough information to know if 10% is achievable. And we would look at things like, well, how much did we increase in the past? And or how much have we, what is the history of for this product of this company to achieve that, right? And then in terms of relevancy, well, we would need to know what are the overall brand or business goals. So in different parts of the channel, we have different metrics. Now, these objectives and metrics are for digital and for different parts of the funnel. Okay, so we'll look at that more closely when we discuss digital. So let's move on now to what are some types of communication of other type of objectives. Sorry. So let's see. So we talked about SMART. Okay, we did that already. But then you have different type of objectives. You have sales-oriented objectives, which are focused on sales. So then and when it comes to sales, well, there's many things that can affect sales. Okay. Where is it appropriate? Well, things that you can measure the impact directly on sales. Now, communication objectives. So let's go back to our thinking, feeling, behavioral. For thinking also, you hear the term cognitive, and for feeling affective and behavioral cognitive. I think, people out of academia like to make up, and in the industry like to make up terms so that they can, I don't know, write a book or something. But anyway, so here is an example for the automobile industry, right? So notice of the very large number of people that become aware what a small number actually purchase. And here we can actually see the numbers, right? You can achieve, if you achieve 90% awareness, which is very hard to do, you may generate only 20% trial and then 5% repurchase. So let's say this is your initial conversion and this is your repeat. So that's why you need to spend sometimes a lot of money or be very creative in how you deliver your marketing message or communication message. Now, there is another approach for objectives that is, I'll be honest with you, I've never used DACMAR, but I've heard of it. So it's worth knowing about it. Basically, it has to do more with communication goals because SMART is used for everything, not just communication. So I guess that's why they designed something that was more for advertising, right? Advertising goals. So it has to do with awareness. So remember, we talked about brand recall being the number one thing for communication, comprehension. So this is understanding not only what the brand is, but what does it do. Then the conviction that you're going to buy the product and the action to actually buy it. So you can set different benchmarks. Okay, this could be based on historical or where you are currently, and then compare how you do versus all of those. So there is many ways on how advertising is communicated. So one way is people have different attitudes and knowledge about your brand, and therefore they express some preference and conviction, and that drives their behavior. But this can be affected by many factors. So the most modern way or the modern way of setting objectives this day is what is called TOFU, MOFU, and BOFU. Okay, so TOFU stands for top of the funnel. So here we're trying to generate interest or awareness. What happens is a lot of times people know Coca-Cola or they know Tide, but how do you capture their attention? Okay, how do you capture the attention? So here is really where the journey initiates. So that's why, I like to think of them like triggers. You have triggers to remind you or to capture your attention to get you to go and buy Tide. Now, middle of the funnel is okay. Now I got you to the middle part. I already caught your attention. Now I need to get you into the interest consideration stage so that you can become a customer. Okay, so this is more the interest consideration phase. And then the bottom of the funnel is okay, now I need to get you to buy. And we'll talk about some of these tactics later on because this is used very much in digital. Okay, so that kind of concludes. So again, when it comes to objectives, you have SMART, which is the general framework for basically all objectives. You can even use them for things that are not have nothing to do with communications. Then you have DACMAR, which is more related. It's been developed for advertising. And then you have the funnel. At what stage is this customer? So then what type of objectives you have to get them from one to the other. And in this customer journey, it's kind of hard to read, but you can have many different metrics and then channels for each of the different stages. So again, this is the top, middle, well, actually middle, and this is bottom. This is post-purchase, and we'll talk about that later on. Okay, so now we go back a little bit to our SDP framework, which is okay. So you have an objective. Who are you going to communicate this message? So we already talked about how SDP works, the different types of segmentation, targeting strategies could be differentiated or undifferentiated, or you can just go niche. So differentiated means you have different products or different messages, like we have the zip card for each segment. Concentrated or niche is you go only after one specific or it's very small. Micro marketing is more one-on-one, like in the case of Netflix. Now, when we talk about digital, we're going to talk a lot more about the persona. The persona is this customer persona, which doesn't need to be a real person. So, in terms of positioning, one way to think of positioning, what is our unique value proposition, is looking at this perceptual map. And we can see things like how distinctive. So in the competitive piece, sorry, so there is three, I haven't gone over this in class, but this is just a model that is using position. First of all, it has to do with from the consumer standpoint, how relevant, resonant, realistic, and then how distinctive you are from a competitive analysis, defensible, durable. So is this something easy to copy? And then from a company standpoint, how feasible, favorable, and can you, if you're able to do all these things. But in advertising, basically what we have is what we call the positioning statement. The positioning statement, there are variations, but they usually all contain the things that are highlighted here. You have a target, a promise, and a reason to believe. Okay? But the template that I've given you has these five parts. What is the brand? What is the target? What is the promise? Which industry? And what is the reason to believe? And we'll look at a couple of examples in a second. Okay, so if we saw, right, we saw the Pantene advertising, Selena Gomez advertising. And when we evaluate advertising, first thing is, do you like it or not? Okay. Then you look at the strategic factors, brand recall, benefits, target, selling line. In other words, what's unique value proposition? And as you will notice, most of this information is what goes here. So what we really want to do when we do an evaluation of our advertising is first to see if it's on strategy, meaning does it communicate in a good, strong way our positioning? And then you can look at the executional factors. The dramatization, does it keep you engaged? The if you have a problem solution format, does the problem overwhelm the solution, or does the execution is maybe very engaging, but you don't remember the product? What about the casting? Does it match the brand character or personality? The jingle, so the jingle usually helps with memorability or mnemonic devices. If you turn off the volume, can you understand what the advertising is about? And most importantly, do you see a benefit or the big idea? And remember, benefits are not always functional. Things that help your brand, maybe product shots or demos also help with the reason to believe. Okay, and then you have the different formats, slice of life, vignettes, solution, and so on. So we did the Pantene example, right? So here it is. I'm going to read it all again. And then we can build our positioning statement. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how all these things happen, right? So we have typically with, I would say with larger businesses, right? Larger established businesses, you have the advertiser, which is the client or the customer, and they pay an ad agency, and ad agencies can do the creative. You may have a media agency, and you may have specialists for each of the different areas, including collateral. Sometimes some agencies do more than one or maybe most of these, okay? But typically, different agencies specialize in different areas. Now, some of them are very centralized and some of them are decentralized. So centralized, very top down. By the way, that makes sense for companies like Apple, right? All the products are under the same umbrella. But then for companies that have very different products, like P&G, maybe the centralized makes more sense. Why? Because P&G doesn't advertise themselves as P&G. They advertise themselves as separate brands. And each brand, and a lot of times belong to completely different categories, right? So you have diapers, and then you have shampoo, and then you have Olay or skincare, completely different areas. Or you have medications like I forgot the I have it in my head. Prilosec, completely different. So now, what usually doesn't change is these areas. So you have the account. Planning and research depends. Larger agencies obviously have it, but they all have account, creative, digital. May be separate, or it may be part of it. They all have production. Media may be separate, and then all the other back office stuff. So let's talk about the most important thing, which is really, I would say, accounts and creative. So let's talk a little bit about the accounts. Well, actually, this goes first into so the account executive is the one that really has all the interaction with the client. It's really the one that is supposed to be kind of the between person between the two, especially between the creative and the brand. Because creatives, if you put them too close to the brand, they may be effective and not necessarily in a positive way. Um, Now, in terms of creative, so this is talking about different types of agencies. There are some creative boutiques, media specialists, mostly work on commissions. Some work on fixed monthly fee, but at least my experience has always been on commission. Now, what's interesting, what has changed a lot is that agencies were more evaluated on advertising related goals or objectives. But now sales is a big part of it. So this is important. It's not just developing creative, but advertising that sales. So this is a typical commission, 17 to 20%. So it's not just about being creative, but being collaborative, assigning the best people to the client's business. So this is again one of the big advantages of having an ad agency. You can't have all these things in house. It's very difficult to have uh, creatives in each of the different areas in house. If you have too many creatives in house, then you're practically an agency. So there is a lot of advantages in terms of creativity and not being biased, and also being very objective and having somebody from the outside develop your advertising. So here are some of the reasons why you may lose clients. Some of these are pretty obvious. And I would say the main thing is, if your advertising is not effective, then have to try somebody else. But big companies, especially global multinationals, this change doesn't happen often. What may happen is they may change the people that are serving, the agency people that are serving you. So maybe they'll change the account executive or the creative team, but changing big agencies, especially on a global basis, doesn't happen very often because it's very difficult to have an agency that delivers services globally. So, well, we didn't talk too much about PR. So, PR again has to do with community, news releases, special events. Digital, we'll talk about later. Um, so, here are some of the things that have been put out of what agencies need to do. Okay, so let's go to a little bit more on message. So, the decision making process typically is this one: problem recognition, information search, alternative, purchase decision. So this is your decision making process, and then you have your post purchase evaluation. But it's not always so logical and linear. Sometimes there may be a motivation or an attitude you have that basically affects that. Okay, so there is this psychological process that is going on while you're making the decisions. Right? But typically, it is the problem information in all the different stages. And it follows very logically the hierarchy of effects. Now, some techniques for market research doesn't change that much, but in advertising, there is a lot of stuff that has to do with association, so pictures, words, and so on. We're also very interested in the attitudes. Um, so typically in the regular marketing, there is a lot of stuff on, satisfaction studies and things like that. Here is more about usage and attitude. And perception. Perception is how do people interpret the same type of message. So a lot of internal factors have an effect on your perception. And sometimes it can be very selective. So, for example, you saw this, and maybe some people notice the two hands, and some people notice just the red and something that looks like Coke. So, different people do, react differently, and that affects the comprehension and retention. Then we have subliminal. So this is, things that you do to play with people's minds without noticing. So the famous example always gave is, like for fractions of seconds, it would be a blink of Coke to make people thirsty and go and get a drink. So that's why it's a little controversial. Then you have also comparison of brands or top of mind awareness. This is reminder advertising. So think of all the vending machines with Coke. Everybody knows Coke, but it is a way to basically keep it top of mind. So this whole thing with the psychological piece has to do with the attitudes that are created and reinforced. And attitudes, again, are very personal. They are learned predispositions, and they represent positive and negative feelings and certain behavioral tendencies. And even though I hate to bring up politics, we see that very clearly, right? We have, in some cases, very polarized population in their attitudes and perceptions of certain things, right? This multi-attribute model, this just means there's many factors, including attitudes, beliefs, and then the importance of each of those factors has an effect on the attitude. So sorry, the attitude has a lot to do with the beliefs, importance, and those attributes. So this is the result, the attitude. It's kind of like a statistical, um, you know, for those of you who like statistics. So this is kind of like a multivariable regression. And this is, the independent variables, and this is the dependent variable, which is attitude. So these attitudes is what sometimes gives certain predisposition to certain brands or maybe drives brand loyalty. Now, something that sometimes people forget is that, the whole purpose of marketing is not just to get somebody to become a customer, but most importantly, to keep them as a loyal customer. So it's not just the satisfaction when they try the product, but then post-purchase or dissatisfaction. So a lot of the theory and what I talked to you guys about, for example, service management has to do with customer service. How do you deal when somebody has a problem? The best opportunity to have somebody become loyal is exceeding on how you would solve that problem. There is also this term that is, I hate memorizing terms, but there are some terms you just need to know. Cognitive dissonance is one of them. So this is like psychological tension after you made a difficult purchase choice. Sometimes you need some reassurance that you bought the right car or you made the right decision. And maybe you regret it later, but this happens a lot with, especially if it's an important high involvement product, so that these are the more expensive items. Now, low involvement is a lot of it is based on routine or habit. So this is again like when you go to the supermarket, you don't think too much about which which product you choose. Maybe you're more driven by two or three products that you're willing to buy, and whichever one is on sale. So, for example, I don't mind going between Tropicana and Florida Natural. And by the way, my preferred would be the one that is fresh and squeezed, but that's usually a little prohibitively expensive. So let's go to some things. So we talked already a little bit about the factors such as culture, so your norms, values. So remember, you have things like if you are, especially like from another country, like in my case, I was born in Venezuela, so my culture has a lot to do with the food that I choose, for example, or where you grew up, or your family, or where you work, or if you're a student, the people that you hang out with. So you have, again, in the case of the family, you may have an initiator, let's say it's the mother, then somebody who gathers the information. Maybe that's you, and you are also the influencer, but then your mother is the one who decides, and then who actually buys the car, maybe combination of people. So the point is there is many different roles. Okay. So we one of the things that is important is the source of the message. And now, when we're in an era of influencers, it turns out that micro influencers may be more cost effective than the macro. Because sometimes for people who really have credibility, right? So here we have a gamer. So again, the source sends this message and then you decode it. This is you, the receiver. So how and who delivers that message is very important. So that if you like and admire Kelly Clarkson, then you may have positive feelings when you see this ad. So there is many different ways of people uh, sharing their information. So here are some of them. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. Let's focus on the most important stuff. So we talked already about this hierarchy, and we once again cognitive, affective, behavioral. So if you know that person, that will help a lot. If you like that person, then you're going to be more convinced to purchase. So we have this model called the persuasive model, right? And there's different factors on how persuasive communication happens. And a lot of it has to do with the favorable or unfavorable thoughts that you have from the source and the message and the product. I'm not going to go over this in detail. Do you notice there is no star? I think it's a little bit unnecessarily complicated. This one I do like. Okay, very simple. So you have your advertising message, you have different motivations, and then you have our three, our hierarchy, the cognition, how you feel about it, and the experience you have, and then the behavior, which is the consumption of it or not. Now, we do know that there is many things that can affect persuasiveness, okay? So independent variables, again, like channel, will be so these are different types of things that can affect. So here you have the different components of communication. You have the source, the message, the channel, the receiver, destination. So you can see for these different types of things, so let's say attention, comprehension, retention, which have more or less of an effect. And that may vary, right? It may vary on many different things. Now, one of the things that we do know is that when it comes to the source, the credibility, maybe the attractiveness, that will have a big um, effect. And but most regularly, this credibility is driven by expertise and trustworthiness. So trust, you think of this person, somebody you trust, okay? I don't know if unbiased is always somebody you trust. You may trust somebody who is biased, but you trust their judgment. And then how much do they know? So we go back to, the gamer example. Or here we have somebody like, so this is Dyson. This is the inventor and CEO of the Dyson product. So this guy is a scientist, so he has a lot of credibility. He invented all these power air products. So persuasiveness increases with the passage of time. So this is called the sleeper effect. Attractiveness could doesn't necessarily mean always physical attractiveness, but how familiar or how likable this person is. Okay, the relationship you may have with this person, how similar you are. So think of this also not only with celebrities, but with the influencers that you follow. So here we have examples of different celebrities. I forgot the name of this golfer, but here we have, oh my God, I just did the case study on the ballet dancer. This is Curry and Tom Brady, and well, Beckham. Now, I have to be careful sometimes with celebrities because they may be overexposed. So Beckham at some point did so many uh, ads that that kind of or what is called overexposure. It may be good for him, but not for the brand. So also you want celebrities, or in the case of influencers, where it's relevant. So if you're talking something that has to do with the everyday things or slice of life with with a family, then here we have Tina Fey, who actually does. These are her kids, so you have that credibility. So again, there is all these factors, right? So always all these factors. So here, this by the way is better to look at here. So celebrity factors, match of the audience with the product. Does it make sense? So we saw Selena Gomez and Pantene, overall image, cost, trustworthiness, risk, familiarity. So all of these things, I would put a check mark for Selena Gomez. I don't know now because she's not as popular with probably Gen Alpha that she was, or C and Z as she was before. Then you also have obviously likability factors. Now be careful, highly attractive models can have a negative impact. So it's not always, um, so here we have an example. Um, and by the way, these are more regular people, and this work really well. I campaign for real beauty. So now, in terms of remembering advertising, best time is to put the product at the beginning and at the end. Mm, So the message you have one-sided. Yeah, this we forget about this. We haven't gone over this in class. You have comparative advertising. This is when you have different products. Fear is used a lot in advertising, right? So we have fear, we have humor, and what it turns out that when you do fear, it may help, but it gets to a point where you may have the opposite effect. So you have to be careful not to overdo it. Humor, again, you're trying to break through the clutter, and get their attention. So this is why in the Super Bowl you see a lot of humor because it's hard to break through the clutter. But it depends also on the brand and the brand if it makes sense to have humor for some brands. Then there is also the wear out. If you hear the same joke several times, it starts wearing out. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the creative strategy and planning. So one of the things that is very important is that for the most part, managers like I was, brand managers, marketing managers, a little more risk averse, want to focus more on selling the product. Creatives are more the artistic, right? They want to maximize the impact. But there is a way to get that balance. So this, I don't often talk about studies, but this one is kind of important. And the reason why it's important is because it's unique. Somebody figure out that if you have originality and elaboration, you're also going to have a lot of sales. So what does that mean? Originality are advertising elements that are rare, surprising, move away from the obvious commonplace. Elaboration is the ad has unexpected details or finish extends basic ideas to become more intricate, complicated, sophisticated. Now, this model is widely used despite the original study being done with European advertising, but this is a very good model. So we talked already about account planning. So as part of the creative process, the account executive or the account people, they are the ones that are really talking to the brands, gathering all the research that is consumer research that is relevant, that could be used as insights for the campaign. They also provide the decision makers, usually these are the brand managers, all the information that is necessary for them to make the decision. So here are some examples: research, quantitative, ethnographic research. So this ultimately leads to some sort of creative output. And this creative output is usually a storyboard. Storyboard is a series of drawings of what the advertising is going to be. And usually, the creative or the agency comes with two or three different storyboards for the brands to review. Now there is more, um, more modern things that can be done, so it looks more like the advertising. You have scripts, you have animatics. Um, Advertising campaign as opposed to a ad is like a theme. It's a theme where with the same theme you can do many ads or sometimes called executions. Slogan, tagline, or selling line is kind of like just do it, and they can be very powerful. So here are some of the most iconic ones, like not just do it, but you have Home Depot and so on. One of my favorite ones, Bounty, the quicker picker upper. So this, how do you basically create all this stuff? Well, the most important document is the creative brief. And the creative brief is where you put all the elements that you need for this advertising to be developed. And this is usually done by the brand. Now, some agencies will do an internal creative brief. So sometimes they call the one that is done by the brand the strategy brief, and then you have the creative brief. And they have these main elements here: the problem, the issue, the objective, the target, the insights. This is the consumer insights from research, the benefits, the main idea you want to communicate, reason to believe. So you can see this is very similar to the positioning statement, tone, the deliverables, and measures of success. And then in P&G, we also use mandatory executional elements, and we put our copy or ad strategy. So the selling line is kind of your unique selling proposition, or sorry, selling idea, and usually you have the benefit, what makes it unique, and why should we care? Now, creating a brand image is done a lot of times through advertising. Um, you want to do it in a way that is dramatic. Dramatic meaning it's engaging. And here is an example of showing distinctive features. So there's different types of styles. You can do very informational, rational with the features. You can look at show different advantages of one versus the other, comparisons of prices like Southwest and United. Now, this slide I really like because it talks about emotional benefits or appeals, and it kind of lists all of them, or some of the most common ones. I'm going to say all of them: safety, security, fear, loss, affection. So you can see how all of these have something to do with like the Maslow needs of, and you can target all of these, and then have for each one different ways of communicating them, right? So here you have one of the most iconic ones. This is Corona. So again, this could be pleasure. We saw a lot of examples of happiness and sharing in the case of Coca-Cola. Reminder advertising. So a lot of times, this is again top of mind. Teaser is when you don't really say what the brand is. You want to capture their interest, and then you kind of tell them the story. User generated content. We'll talk about that when we talk about digital. So you can have very scientific way of telling a story, or you can have demonstrations. So in the Pantene ad, we had the animated demonstration, or comparisons where you show like Tide versus other detergents, how one does better than the other. Testimonials, again, this is like an endorsement from somebody credible. Slice of life, very much or very common in advertising, like it says, it's like a regular situation in life. Animation or personalities, so like we have the Colonel Sanders from KFC. And again, impact. Impact through pictures, visual elements, symbols. Dramatization, as we said in advertising, really is kind of keeping you engaged. And we have this thing called 5 steps: exposition, conflict, increased action, climax, resolution. It's kind of like storytelling or humor or a combination of things. This is more for print advertising, the headings. We're gonna not cover much about print advertising. We're focused really on the visual uh, video or television. So again, attract attention. Now, the thing with that I will say about print is a lot harder because it's only a picture, a few words. So you need to capture that attention with one visual. But a picture is worth 1,000 words. So you do something very impactful. I don't know if this will work, but it definitely captures the attention. Then you have jingles. So when we did the Pantene ad, we had Selena's song, which if it's catchy, it can be very effective. So when planning a commercial, in addition to the story where you may have a script, and the script may be something that you do before the storyboard. So the whole process is after you have the storyboard, you have your pre-production meetings, everybody's going to be involved, the production or the shoot, and then the post-production is basically is the editing. We're not going to talk about digital. Digital will leave for later because digital is all part of my digital marketing presentation. And we'll talk about branding because branding is a big part of messaging. And with branding, the thing is, as we saw with Steve Jobs, has to do a lot with brand culture, right? Brand culture. And brand culture means culture within the firm. So branding, uh, in addition to the attributes or benefits of a product, here you have a lot of beliefs and values. Okay. You also have the name, the logo, which can be trademarked, the packaging. So you have different types of brand. You have generic, which is unbranded. Then private label, which are the store brands, and manufacturers, the regular brands. They can be line extensions, like different types of flavors or sizes of Cheerios, or brand extensions, which can be the same brand but different products. So packaging, again, a very important part of branding. You also have the back label. So what is a brand? It's a name, a term, a symbol, a design, or a combination that defines a product. And what you're trying to achieve in order to get brand loyalty is recognition, preference, and ultimately insistence, where people basically insist that that's their brand and they are loyal, don't want anything else. And over time, you build the value of this brand. The value of this brand is brand equity. It takes time, but if you do it right, then it can represent very large market share and higher prices. But all these brands, over time, if you don't take care of them, some of them don't survive. So you have this pyramid where you go from presence to relevance performance. And then if it's advantageous to you, then you may have this bonding effect. But over time, you need to maintain differentiation and relevance. So we have these four factors invented by Young and Rubicam, and it's a very important framework. So the framework says that your current stature depends very much on STEAM and knowledge. STEAM and knowledge is a combination of perceived quality, okay, and knowledge is awareness. But then your future growth potential is determined by relevance and differentiation. So relevance being, you know, is it meeting my current needs? Is it relevant anymore? And differentiation. So we did the case study with Bose, mini case study with Bose, which invented noise reduction, noise cancellation. So they had huge differentiation. And then over time, they built all this awareness and reached market leadership. But then once this differentiation, so you go through this right here. So differentiation is the first one. So you start very high differentiation. Then as you become very, make it very aware, then you become, much bigger brand until you reach some sort of leadership because then you have all of them. You have differentiation, you have awareness, perceived value, differentiation, you are relevant, perceived value, and awareness. So you reach all of them. But the first one you typically lose when you start eroding is differentiation. We saw that with noise cancellation. So here are most important brands in terms of market value. So they value, basically, if you remove the name, how much does that name represent in terms of billions of dollars? So for Apple, 214 billion. And by the way, I need to update this, 2018. Uh, Maybe the number has changed, but it's still probably, a big percentage of the value of the company. Other things is logos don't need to change that much. Okay, so over time, and this one I don't think anybody had seen, but over time, this is the only thing that changed from color to monochrome. Here, Starbucks, they just removed Starbucks coffee because everybody knows it's Starbucks and it's now not only coffee. We already talked about the different types of brands. You have extensions. The line extensions, again, is basically different versions of the same brand. Brand extensions, different products of the same brand. You can have multi brands. So again, no, they're not the same brand, and then or completely new brands that haven't existed. Okay, so that concludes the review. 1 hour and 14 minutes. So that is more or less what the class ends, but I prefer to do it here because sometimes in class, we run out of time. So here you have a chance to basically review everything. I know that it's a lot, but think of the most important themes, right? So we talked about some things that are really really important, and some things maybe so not important. So it's a kind of review. So first we talk about integration, having the same common message. We talked about then the 6 M's, objectives. So we have the SMART framework, we have the DAGMA framework, and then we have top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. Then when it comes to targeting, we did a little review on STP, segmentation, targeting positioning, which is how to have something unique or have a explore your competitive advantage. Then we moved into, so again, market. Here is a Zipcar example where you can have the different messages to each segment, or in the case of Thai, different products for each segment. Then we move to message, which is what we have done probably the bulk of the semester. We started with positioning statements. So again, coming back from positioning, and we can do that by looking at the advertising. Then we looked at different types of agencies, decentralized, the departments. Big thing is accounts, creative, media, and then other services sometimes are separate. Um, so again, things about the agency, how it works. Then the decision-making process and how does the message affect each part, and the hierarchy of effects. Think, feel, do. Then we went on selective perceptions. So remember, perceptions are things that are hard to understand because they have a lot to do with your culture and social needs, emotional things. Then we talked about the source of the message, the credibility, okay, and the trustworthiness that you have. And then we also talked about persuasiveness. And persuasiveness can be from several factors, right? So these are the factors: the source, the message, the channel you're using, you, the receiver, and even the destination. And then we talked about the different formats, how humor helps. Then we talked about this, very important, how when you have originality and elaboration, or originality and artistic value, that not only is very creative, but it has the best effect on sales. So yes, there is a way to do both. And then we talked about, well, you have your creative brief. Actually, this is interesting because these two things should come. Creative strategy comes first, and this is kind of like the output. So let's just put this at the end. So first we have our creative brief, which is the document. So there is all these parts to the strategy. As a matter of fact, let's put this over here. So we have the creative development process, your creative brief, you have um, your storyboard, and then let's see, you have different types of appeals. But I want to put right after the storyboard what comes next, which is this one. So this right here. So okay, now I like it. First, creative brief, storyboard or animatics, and then production. Right. So here is pre-production meeting, the shoot, editing. So now this looks like the way regular is. So you have all these different type of execution stuff. You have a last slice of life, humor, comparative advertising, powerful visuals, and so on. And obviously the impact is very important. Then we finally, I think we ended with branding. Actually, we do have something. No, we finished with branding. So what's important about branding? Why is it that some brands don't make it? Why is it some survive and some don't survive? So, Steve Jobs realized that he didn't have any new products. So basically, he needed to do a brand marketing or brand marketing ad. What does the company stand for? What are the values? Why should we care about Apple, right? So you need to do that to remain relevant. And then we have, because we have this pyramid where, okay, people know you exist, but why should you be relevant to me? And because Apple at that point was not really significantly better or even better than its competition, it didn't have these two things. So it needed to at least work on these things. Now, the four dimensions that are really important are these, right? Steam and knowledge. Steam, again, perceive um, your perceived quality. So this is, you have a strong perceived quality and you need awareness, because only if a few people know you exist, then that doesn't help you very much. So both, again, they people knew of their cancellation, noise cancellation, then they built a lot of awareness through advertising for more people to find out about it. The problem is they did not continue to innovate, so they were not able to keep up with technology. So in the case of noise cancellation, it was everybody had it. So yes, it's relevant, but there were other things. And then there were others like Beats, which was clearly differentiated. Okay, they used Dr. Dre, they used and again relevance, because Dr. Dre, one of the pioneers of of rap and hip hop, and then you have differentiation with all the different colors, and then later Apple with the AirPods and wireless technology and the whole ecosystem. So the problem is that if you do not continuously innovate, then what ends up happening is, if you lose differentiation, then you start to erode to the point where you may basically cease to exist. These were all the leading brands in the past. And from here, when it comes to consumer electronics, you have Sony, Sharp, Samsung, Pioneer, a little bit of Toshiba, and the rest are basically gone. Zenith dominated for like 2 decades television. Magnavox, the VCRs or VHS. Panasonic still around, but for a while they dominated flat screens. But then again, brands need to continuously innovate and stay up with technology. All right, thank you very much, everybody, and I hope this was useful.